can we prevent them and how can we treat them? We are talking about pressure sores and about bandage sores, and actually what's the difference between these two? If you look to the definition of pressure sores, you can find in Wikipedia that it's defined as a localized damage to skin and or underlying tissue that usually occurs over a bony prominence as a result of usually long-term pressure. And by this pressure, we get a completely or a partially obstructed blood flow to the soft tissue, so to the subcutaneous tissue and the skin. And the pressure or the obstruction is caused by the weight of the individual or the part of the body. And we see the pressure sores most commonly in individuals that are not moving. So if we look over the speeches, we can conclude that pressure sores are most common in people, so in old people, ill people that are laying in the bed or sitting in a wheelchair, and those people are more susceptible for pressure sores. However, if we look to our veterinary practice, we see more often bandage sores and sores. Actually, the definition, this is of course people where we see the pressure sores. When you're lying on the back, you see the sores in the sacrum and the back, shoulders, head, and the ankles. And if people are lying on the side, they are on the shoulder, elbow, hip, etc., knee, ankle, etc. So usually by bed-laying people. The difference, if we look to the definition of bandage sores, the definition is actually the same. However, the pressure is caused by the bandage. Because a bandage is too tight, so you get a direct pressure of the bandage, or in case that the bandage is too loose, the bandage slips and creates pressure in that way, or wrinkles in the bandage. And we see these kinds of sores more often in our in veterinary practice. The animals that have bandage sores or that have wounds are usually very often healthy animals. So animals after accident or after biting or a traumatic wound in horses. So we usually have normal healthy animals that only have a wound, and we bandage those wounds and then we create the bandage sores ourselves. So that's a rather difference between human medicine and veterinary medicine. That will not mean that we do not have the real pressure sores in our patients, in our animal patients, but not as often as bandage sores. I have a few examples of bandage or pressure sores. As we see them in all speeches, this is an example of Irish wolf wound that had an amputation of this toe, and at the medial side of the leg you can see that quite a deep pressure sore developed, so over the bony prominences. This is another example, and this is more a real pressure sore, which we see often in the big breeds, in the large breeds. This is a pressure sore on the elbow, and this is caused by the weight of the animal when the animal is lying often or for longer times on a hard surface. And Mirja will tell you probably more about these kinds of things. Another example, you may know that I'm a consultancy, so colleagues approach me with difficult wounds, both small animal and equine patients, and what I see quite often are hind legs of cats, that if there is a wound in some of the part of the hind leg, that somewhere in the process of bandaging additional wounds occur. And this is an example of a European short-haired cat, which had a nice healing wound. This has been quite a large burn wound, and the wound is healing quite quickly. And then at some day, you see a dark spot on the skin, and something is going on over there. And in the further process of the healing, you can see that an additional wound develops at this site. And hopefully, Mirja can tell us more about these kinds of problems later on. in horses, when we talk about horses, we see also quite often pressure sores or bandage sores, and the most common and the most difficult ones are those on the carpus and the tarsus. So on the accessory carpal bone, it's a palmar side of the carpus, and on the tarsus, these bandage sores are usually located at the Achilles tendon. We have other pressure sores or bandage sores in horses, and the less common ones are on the metatarsus or the metacarpus. We see them on the dorsal and or the plantar palmar side, and very often the owner is involved. And that's in case that the owner is using bandages around the lower leg. These are usually elastic bandages, which are applied too tight or with not enough padding under the elastic bandage, or the owner leave them on for a too long period, or the horse is turned out outside in the paddock or in the pasture, and there is a shower and the bandages become wet, and wet cotton and wet bandages, they shrink, so then the pressure increases, and finally there occurs a problem. And this is an example of such a pressure sore. This horse had a bandage for one or the other tendon problem. I can't remember exactly. But initially, the thing is that initially you don't see anything wrong on the leg. And only after 10 or 14 days, you see that skin is changing, it becomes firm. And then after that period, so approximately 2 weeks, you see that necrosis develops. And finally, 2 weeks later, you see the entire extent of these pressures. And this horse had not only a pressure sore at the palmar side of the leg, but also at the dorsal side of the leg. And you see that the palmar side, this side, a very big wound developed with involvement of the flexor tendon. And at the dorsal side, at this side, you see that there's also a big wound with a big part of the extensor tendon, which is necrotic and has to be debrided. The interesting thing of pressure sores is if you relieve the pressure and you do a proper treatment, that these wounds in general heal quite quickly. So you can see 3 weeks later, this is the moment that it was admitted to me, and debridement was done, and you see that 3 weeks later the wounds are properly healing, and that is because the pressure is taken away. Another reason for pressures in horses is after immobilization, so after using a cast or a splint, and the most common source we see then is at the site of the proximal sacrum weak bone, so the plantar or the palmar side of the fetlock. And you see that the skin, usually it's not more than red skin and some loose loss of hair, but sometimes this can also be a real wound, partial thickness, or sometimes even full thickness, but fortunately that doesn't happen very often. And the other bandage or cast source that we see quite often is the upper limit of the cast, and that is usually because we use half limb cast morphology. That is at the proximal side of the metatarsus or the metacarpus. Other sores are on the heel bulb, like you can see here, so the heel bulb area or the coronary band, and other sores are on the bony prominences of the carpus, the tarsus, so again the accessory carpal bone, or the medial tuberosity of the radius, on the calcaneus, or on the malleoli. So the bony prominences are prone to develop pressure sores. Quite a special sore after casting is the one at the plantar metatarsus, and that's usually caused, you have an example here, that is usually caused when a cast is applied in extended position of the leg, but the leg is not extended enough. And when the horse is putting weight on his limb and then is extending its entire leg, it presses the flexor tendon side against the cast. So in that way also sores can develop, and these are usually quite severe sores if the monitoring has not been correct. The other last group of pressure sores in horses are the real pressure sores, and these occur in animals in a bad condition. So sick animals, older horses, foals in a bad condition after birth, and these animals lay down a lot in the stable, and if there is insufficient bedding in a hard floor, then these sores can easily develop. And it can be quite severe sores, like you see here at the lateral side of the tarsus, with a big spot, and you can see here the part of the malleolus where the wound is even deeper up to the bone. And similar sores can develop at the side of the elbow. Well, I would elaborate a bit more about the sores, the most common sores on the carpus of the tarsus. That was the request for tonight. And these pressure sores on both locations are almost always caused by the bandage. And the bandage gives direct pressure on these sides because the bandage has been too tight, or it's caused because the bandage has slipped, and that results in pressure. So that's so in those cases the bandage has been too loose or not correctly applied. So the causes are clear. The prevention, therefore, is also clear. We have to prevent pressure, of course, and we have to prevent slipping. And this all seems very easy, but I know that it's not that easy because I see these pressure sources quite often in patients that are admitted to me. And this has all to do with bandaging techniques. So the treatment of these kind of problems is quite easy. We have to treat the wound, so we have to choose the dressing, the type of dressing which is most optimal for the type of wound. And additionally, we always have to relieve the pressure, because these kinds of wounds do not heal if there is still pressure on top. And that's the case with all pressure wounds. If we don't relieve the pressure, they don't heal. And of course, there must be a good bandage, and we must prevent slipping of the bandage. So in the prevention of pressure or the relief of pressure, there is a principal difference between the carpus and the tarsus. So the sores on the accessory carpal bone and on the Achilles tendon. Because of the shape of this bone and the extension of this bone, we cannot use extra padding of this side. If we would use extra padding on the accessory carpal bone, then we would increase the pressure on the bone. So we would deteriorate the healing of this wound, or we would increase the chance on the development of a pressure sore. So no extra padding in these kind of problems. On the other hand, on the Achilles tendon, we need extra padding because there is no other way to relieve the tension, to relieve pressure over here. So we need an extra thick and soft pad on the Achilles tendon. So that's the principal difference. So how can we relieve the pressure on the accessory carpal bone? That's by your bandaging technique. I will elaborate on that later on. So you apply the bandage in such a way that there is no elastic bandage on top of the accessory carpal bone. Or what some people do, they cut a hole in the bandage. Personally, I do not like it so much. I prefer this one. And another way to prevent pressure on the accessory carpal bone is to make a donut. And this donut can be made of orthopedic filth. I've mentioned an example here for you. So this orthopedic filth is sticking, so you can make different layers, and you can see the pressure sore here in the middle of the donut. And in this way you can relieve the pressure on the sore, and usually it will heal quite quickly after using a donut. Another way to make a donut is by using artificial cotton. You wrap it around your fingers, and thereafter you wrap the roll over these layers you've created here, And this way, by turning this round and round, you can make nice donuts. And this donut can be made in the size, whatever you like, and the thickness, whatever you like. So this is a way of making small and big donuts. But even these donuts will not work in the tarsal problems, in the Achilles pressure sores on the Achilles tendon. But you can, because you can imagine, if you would make a big donut on this one and you apply a bandage thereafter, you have to pressure on the calcaneus and on the proximal side of the Achilles tendon. So that will not work. So you have to spread the pressure on this entire part of the Achilles tendon. So there you need the extra and the soft padding. Well, how can you do that? You can make a big pillow, a thick pillow of soft material, of padding material, several layers, and by turning the elastic bandage around this pillow, you can spread the pressure on the Achilles tendon. And in this way, quite severe pressure sore, like you see here, can heal in 5 weeks' time, and you will see that it finally, if you relieve the pressure, it will heal properly, it will heal quickly, and you can see that it's only a small scar is left. So the problems can be easily, well, rather easily solved by relieving the pressure. Well, how do we prevent slipping of the bandage? And actually, as I see many patients are admitted to me, I don't have to explain to you that this is not a good bandage. So it has slipped down. As you can see, they did not use enough padding, and I think they only used one roll of elastic bandage, and this is not working. And if this happens 1 or 2 times, then I can assure you, I can guarantee you that a pressure sore will develop on the Achilles tendon. So proper bandaging is essential, and we are all veterinarians and we all think we can apply proper bandages on our veterinary patients, but this proper bandaging is really difficult sometimes. Another example of one of our colleagues that tried to treat the hygroma on the carpus and with a firm bandage. And you may know that you don't treat, that you cannot solve the problem of the hygroma with a firm bandage. But what he did, on the other hand, is creating a big pressure sore on the accessory carpal bone. So many of the sores are induced by our cells. So very important is to prevent slipping of the bandage. And how can you do that? I have 5 tips for you, and I go through them one by one. The first is to make a separate bulky bandage of the lower limb, which can be serve as a support for the carpal and the tarsal bandage. The way we apply the bandage on the carpus and tarsus is very important, and I will show you pictures of that. We can use an adhesive bandage to tape the bandage to the limb, or we can use adhesive foam, which serves as an anti-skid. And in the very difficult cases, we can fixate the bandage to a splint to prevent slipping. So I will go through you all through these points. So the separate bulky bandage on the lower limb, it's quite easy. What I personally like to use is the veterinary gamshi for horses, the 45 centimeters, because that is the length of a lower limb of an adult horse is approximately 45 centimeters, so that's a nice size. Well, I don't mention this because I have stock in the company, but I just very much like this because you can cut pieces of the gamshi and it's very easy to handle. So you can see here a piece of the gamshi is wrapped around the leg and the elastic bandage is applied. Very easy, and you can see that I leave some of the padding visible under the edges of the elastic bandage to prevent sores at this side and at this side. And then you can apply a second layer or a third layer, whatever you like, and you make a bulky bandage on the lower limb, which can be left there in horses for quite a long time. If you are experienced in bandages, you can leave this for 10 days or 14 days, as long as it is clean and as long as it is fitting well and not slipping down. And then on top of this bandage, you apply the bandage for the tarsal wound or the carpal wound. And this cannot slip down because it's resting on the lower limb bulky bandage. And so this bandage should be firm, but should not be very tight. So it should be a good fitting bandage. So that's one of the ways that you can prevent slipping. The other way is to use the figure-8 wrapping, and actually I have this from the past. When I was working as resident at the university, we were not allowed to use the elastic bandages in those times. We are talking about the 90s, so that shows how old I am in the meantime. We were not allowed to use these because they were too expensive. So we had to apply bandages around the carpus and tarsus with the normal cotton, non-stretchable bandages. And that was quite difficult, so you needed the bandage techniques. And I still use these also for the elastic bandages. What I do is following a piece of gamshi is folded around the carpus, and you can see that it's an effort and a challenge to apply a good bandage. If you look to my face, I saw that on the pictures later on, but I have the tongue between my teeth. And you start wrapping the elastic bandage circular on the distal side of the bandage. Thereafter, you unroll the elastic bandage, and you let it retract, and you go up. So there's not much tension on this part of the bandage. And then you make a circular winding again on the proximal side. There's tension on this side, so on the circular one, and you go back with a non-extended part of your bandage again. So there's not much tension on this part, and this is firm. Oh, sorry, and the other one is firm. And then you repeat this. So a non-extended, so a loose one here, and a firm one, a circular firm one here, and then you go back and again, and finally you have a bandage with the V-shaped form on the dorsal side of the carpus. And in this way you have a very nice bandage that fits very well. And the other practical point is that in this way of bandaging, you leave open the side of the accessory carpal bone. On the tarsus, you can do the similar thing. So again, gamshi, you start at the lower side of the bandage. You must be prepared that you need 2 rolls of elastic bandage. And then you go again, you go up. This is not extended too much. A circular one at the proximal side, you need your pillow here, so you need to include that. So circular winding around the pillow and the proximal side of the bandage. You go down, not much tension over here, a circular one below, and then you go up again, circular winding, etc., etc., etc. And in this way you wrap, you apply the elastic bandage on the tarsus, and finally you also cover the final point of this pillow. So in this way, a bandage will fit much better and will not slip down very easily. And also here you can see the V-form shape of the windings. The third way to prevent slipping is using the adhesive tape. Well, everybody of you will know that on the proximal side and distal side. There's not much to say about this. Another tip is using adhesive foam, and I've mentioned some examples here, which you apply under the padding and you stick it on the skin. So that is, it works as an anti-skid. So the gamshi will not slip down very easily on this foam-like material. By the way, this is not a wound foam, this is just padding foam. So a circular layer of this foam, and you can leave that lumpy on the skin because it sticks very firm to the skin, and horses do not like if you remove that. So just leave it on and use it as the anti-skid layer. And the last one is, but you do not need that very often, is to use a splint to which you actually hang up the bandage on the splint. So on the tarsus or the splint at the palmar side of the carpus. So take home messages. Most important for both the prevention and treatment of the sores is prevent pressure. So don't apply a bandage too tight, and prevent slipping. So you also should not apply them too loose. So bandaging techniques is very important, and we should learn that our younger colleagues and our students better, I think. Realize that a pressure sore will never ever heal when pressure is not relieved. So therefore we need the relief of pressure, so the donut for the carpus and a thick pad for the tarsus. And also realize that a bandage will, and that's for all species, also the small animal species, bandages will never immobilize a joint or a leg. So if you have, for whatever reason, if you need to immobilize a leg, then use a splint or a sleeve cast. So you cannot do that by bandages. And if you try to do that by a bandage, the risk is that you will apply the bandage too firm and that you will create the pressure sores. So, and of course, prevention of sores is better than the treatment. So as a last recommendation, I would like to invite you all, those that are not yet member of the Veterinary Wound Association, to become a member. It's also always nice, and we have a lot on our website. I must say that tomorrow the website is there's being built on the website because we go to another provider, but I hope that tomorrow evening that everything will be all right again. So thanks. Let's see. Oh. Now I have to go out here.
You just say stop sharing. That's at the top of the screen.
I stop share. Yeah, I see. Yeah, thanks.
Okay, thank you very much, Jacintha. I've been monitoring the chat, and there were no questions along the way, but I had several myself, or comments maybe. So unless somebody else has something, I just wanted to comment on the pressure sores that are over the calcanean tendon of the horse,
yeah,
which I have normally handled actually also with pressure relief by adding 2 rolls of soft cotton on either side of the tendon,
yeah,
which I think has also worked quite well. It's a little bit similar to what you explained with the accessory carpal bone, that you take away the pressure rather than try to add padding.
Okay.
So that's an additional little tip that you can potentially use.
Yeah, I'm always a little bit afraid that you put too much pressure on the calcaneal bone or at the proximal side of the Achilles tendon. But if it's very soft, apparently it works.
Yeah, and it's on either side of the tendon. So in that little groove that's formed between the tendon and the tip of the hock. So nothing that can actually apply pressure. So I've never had any untoward reactions with that.
Okay, great.
Are there any other questions among the participants? Otherwise, I think, oh, Mirja, potentially, no? Otherwise, I think